A compounding misery there is the scale of hunger in the city. The UN-backed Integrated Food Monitor has confirmed this Monday that there are famine conditions in Al Fasher. Camille Knight has this report.
Just over a week after Al Fasher was captured by paramilitary rapid support forces, thousands of refugees who managed to flee the besieged city have set up camp about 80 kilometers to the west.
I've never heard gunfire as heavy as that before. Everyone fled the city, soldiers and civilians. Everyone rushed to escape amidst all the gunfire around us.
Survivors have told horrifying stories of what happened when the rapid support forces seized control of Al Fasher on the 26th of October, which include accounts of mass executions and rape. The prosecutor's office at the International Criminal Court now warns those atrocities could constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Before the war, 1.5 million people lived in Al Fasher, and while the UN estimates more than 65,000 have fled the city, it fears tens of thousands remain trapped, with humanitarian groups like the Red Cross unable to reach them.
It's history repeating, and it becomes worse every time a place is taken over by the other party. And there's just no restraint in what these weapon bearers do, and this is what I find most concerning.
The violence is reminiscent of 2 decades ago when the Arab origin militia that gave rise to the RSF was accused of committing a genocide against the people of Darfur, many warning another genocide is now unfolding. At the UN, Sudan's ambassador has pointed the finger at the United Arab Emirates, accusing it of financing the rapid support forces. And while it continues to deny its implication, reports show it has provided crucial logistical support to the paramilitary fighters who conducted the assault on Al Fasher.
Joining us to speak more on this is Nicholas Westcott, who is a professor of practice in diplomacy at the Department of Politics and International Studies at SOAS University. Nicholas, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. I would love to get your reaction to the international courts, criminal court, saying today that the atrocities committed in Al Fasher could amount to crimes against humanity and war crimes.
I think that it sends a very strong signal that what is happening in Darfur, in Al Fasher in particular, is very high up the scale of evidence necessary to indict those responsible for war crimes. And as some people have said, 20 years ago, there was an act of genocide against the African people in that region, and this looks like a rerun of the same. The ICC are very careful to make sure they don't make any firm accusations until they have assessed the full evidence, and obviously we're still receiving evidence, but the best that we received, both from personal testimony, from satellite imagery, from reports and social media reports that are coming out when verified, is that what is happening there is extremely severe in terms of reaching the threshold for being a war crime. It's what the ICC exists for, really, where there is no law system that can bring people to account, to call these people out and say this is a war crime, and it should be tackled legally, juridically. The people should not be allowed to do that with impunity. But at the moment, it's quite clear from these images you're showing that impunity effectively exists for the RSF in Al Fasher itself. I think it's hard to exaggerate the severity of what appears to be happening there.
Well, the latest evidence of just the deepening tragedy there is the UN-backed monitor confirming today that there are famine-like conditions in Al Fasher. I mean, how far is the scale of the humanitarian crisis there now at this point?
It's been accumulating over the last 2 years since the effectively civil war broke out between the Sudan armed forces on one side under General Burhan and the rapid support forces under General Hemeti. And these two rivals have been fighting more or less across the country. The RSF were driven out of Khartoum earlier this year, but they have therefore redoubled their efforts to try and seize firm control over western Sudan. In the process of that, all humanitarian action, as well as the normal actions of the market to supply food, have been disrupted. And both sides have been remarkably ruthless in trying to cut off support to the other side, to the civilian population who, sandwiched between the two armies, are just suffering. As many as can flee to places where they can get access to food, south into Uganda, we've seen it, west into Chad, north into Egypt. But many simply can't physically make it that far. And we saw in Darfur itself first an attack on the refugee camp Zamzam a few months ago, which effectively resulted in a massacre of civilians, most of whom then fled into Al Fasher. But once there, they were surrounded by the RSF, who effectively cut off all supplies of food and fuel into the city, resulting in effectively a famine, though because no independent journalists or UN officials could get access to it, it was hard to accumulate the evidence. But it's quite clear that before Al Fasher fell, the people in there were suffering severe food deprivation. But it's not just there, it's across the whole country. The internally displaced have been desperately short of food because humanitarian supplies can't get in and they can't buy anything. So in 2 areas, we have effectively a declared famine already, and elsewhere very severe malnutrition and food. It's a consequence of war.
Well, many experts are saying that it is very much like history is repeating itself. In 2003, when the genocide in Darfur took place, celebrities like George Clooney spoke out for the cause. Former US President George Bush also made Sudan a priority of his presidency. But today, Sudan is very much seen as a forgotten war, one that is almost out of sight, out of mind. Why do you think this conflict gets such little attention?
I think it's slightly different. What it shows is that the world itself has changed significantly since 2003, when there was a multilateral order, when there were rules that people applied, when the United States wanted to try and maintain order through the world. It's not that what is happening in Sudan is a big secret, nor that it's been forgotten. It is just being deliberately ignored by those who could do something about it. And that's because they don't particularly, the United States or the Gulf countries, who could stop this war tomorrow if they chose to do so, are choosing not to do so. Partly because the Gulf Arab countries and neighbouring countries are supporting rival sides and want their own side to win, and therefore are quite happy to fuel the war, whatever the suffering of civilians. And secondly, the US has effectively withdrawn from underwriting a global system that tried to impose some rules of responsibility to protect, deliberately try and prevent the kind of genocides that we saw in Rwanda and the ethnic cleansing that we saw in Bosnia. There was an international reaction against that, saying we mustn't let this happen anymore. And rules were set up to try and prevent that, which in 2003, the US government was still trying to implement. Turn on 20 years, 2025, the US government is effectively washing its hands of it and saying, it's not our business, not our concern, and the Gulf countries are neither being pressured nor choosing to try and stop this war. So what we're seeing, this is a product of the world that has been created by those who think power should predominate rather than rules, and local actors are taking advantage of that to try and secure some advantage for themselves. It's fairly well documented that the UAE supports the RSF, Egypt and Saudi Arabia support the Burhan government, and it's a kind of proxy war it's become almost between these. The result is that Sudanese civilians are suffering. So it's not, it's neglect rather than forgetfulness.
Well, the UAE, as you mentioned, has been accused of backing the RSF. Can you just lay out for us the evidence of that? I mean, it denies supporting the rapid support forces. Tell us how it has been supporting them.
Yes, there's been a fair amount now put in the public domain, which I agree with you. The UAE government say they're giving no support, but verified shows that flights are regularly going in from the UAE to Chad, to an airport quite near the border, from which it is seen that convoys are crossing into Sudan, going to places where the RSF are based, who then happen to have drones and improved weapon supplies. You can join up the dots. You haven't got the invoices. Nobody will admit that it's happening, but it's fairly visible. And in return, a lot of the gold that is mined in areas under RSF control seems to find its way to Dubai, where there are records of gold imported from different sources. And sometimes